few thoughts ahead of Denis Douglin versus George Groves. Now, I've made a few comments on this fight previously. I've said that in my opinion it was a 95-5 matchup. In other words, this fight would have to happen 20 times for George Groves to lose the fight once. I've actually rethought that, having looked into the form. I'm now viewing it as a 99-1 fight. I think this fight would have to happen 100 times before George Groves was to suffer a single defeat. I think the gulf between the two is that vast, and I think that this really is a very, very bad mismatch. Now, let me say, I'm not being overly critical of the match, because George Groves was probably only allowed on this card on the basis that he fought a very, very easy opponent. Put simply, his promoters, Sauerland, would probably want it on one of their shows if he was going to be in a 50-50 matchup or a big money matchup. So they probably only loaned him out to Hearn on the basis that it's an easy opponent. And I don't begrudge them for doing that. That makes business sense. I also don't begrudge Hearn for putting them on, because having Groves on the card is going to create huge interest amongst the casual fans. It's going to sell tickets, it's going to sell pay-per-views, it's going to raise boxing's profile as a whole. We need characters like Groves in boxing. So I'm not being critical that this fight has been made, because I would have made it. However, what I am doing is being clear on my thoughts on how the fight will go. And this is a very, very, very big mismatch, in my opinion. Denis Douglin is fighting at super middleweight. Now, I do understand he may have had fights previously, or one fight previously, so we say, at super middleweight. I get that. But the guys he's been in with haven't been super middleweights whatsoever. In fact, as far as I can make out from his record, and I have looked semi-extensively, he has never fought a genuine super middleweight. In his entire career, the guy has never fought a super middleweight. Not once. It's amazing that Boxrec have him rated as highly as they do. I think he's borderline top 50. But as I say, let's make no mistake, this guy has never fought a super middleweight previously. Not once. Not on one single occasion. Now, what makes that worse is it's not only that the guy has not been fighting super middleweights. 2 fights ago, he fought a guy called Orlando Membrino, who came to the ring with an unimpressive 12-18 record. 12 wins, 18 losses. Now, what makes that even more disturbing is not just the calibre of opposition ahead of a George Groves fight, but that Orlando Membrino is a career welterweight. A career welterweight. Welterweight being 147 pounds, super middleweight being 168. He also has 2 stoppage losses out of his 3 losses. To Jamel Charlo, who I understand is a very, very decent prospect, and Dol Carasquillo. I'm sure I've pronounced that incorrectly, so my apologies. Now, let's ignore the Charlo KO for 1 loss, because I understand Charlo is a decent fighter. But Carasquillo, who KO'd Douglin in only the 3rd round of their fight, was a career light middleweight with a record of 14 wins and 17 losses. Now, Charlo, whilst also being a decent prospect, KO'd Douglin early, and again is a career light middleweight. So this is a guy who's never fought a super middleweight. 2 fights ago, fought a career welterweight with a record of 12-18. Got KO'd by a light middleweight. Got KO'd by another light middleweight whose record was 14 wins and 17 losses. Surely he's in for a very, very rude awakening against George Groves. First and foremost, George Groves is a genuine super middleweight. George Groves will have to cut to make the 168 limit. George Groves walks around bigger than 168. He'll be coming to the ring bigger at 168. He also is a very, very hard puncher. Arguably the hardest puncher at super middleweight. I mean, I know he got knocked out by Carl Frost, but if we look at Carl Frost's resume, he isn't typically a one-punch knockout artist. Nor is Andre Ward. Nor is Arthur Abraham at this weight. Nor is Andre Durrell. Nor is Robert Stieglitz. Nor is Sakio Bika. George Groves is a guy who can cause damage with a single punch. For people who doubt that, look at his first round knockdown of Carl Frost. Look at his stoppage of Paul Smith. The guy is very, very heavy-handed. And if you're getting knocked out by light middleweights with losing career records, you should not be in the same ring as George Groves. It's going to be a very, very difficult night for you. I have some doubts over George Groves. I question his stamina. I question his tactical awareness. I question his chin. I was very disappointed by his performance against Rebras. But this will not be a tough fight for George. The guy is too small. He hasn't faced the right level of opposition. And he's too easy to KO. I should mention, the guy's record in itself isn't abhorrent. 17 wins and 3 losses. It's a very respectable record numerically. But if you look at the kind of opposition he's actually been beating, it's very questionable at best. As I say, a career welterweight with a 12-18 record in his 2014 fights. So all in all, not critical of the matchup being made. It's always good to see George Groves fight on British TV and on British soil. Long may that continue. Don't begrudge Eddie Hearn for making the fight. I think it made business sense to do it. Don't begrudge Sauerland for making it an easy opponent. I wouldn't expect them to risk their prospect on another person's show, especially when they're in a sort of mandatory challenger position. But this is not a competitive fight. Surely it's got to end in the first 3 or 4 rounds with a devastating George Groves knockout. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.